Welcome to the High Quality CTE Programs of Study webinar series. My name is Candice Mott, and I will be leading us through the world of assessments. To introduce myself, I have 20 years in CTE as a student and as a professional. I'm a former cosmetology instructor and a former family consumer sciences teacher. I have worked with 11 disciplines and industries from the instructional standpoint and as an administrator. I attended the University of Memphis, and I received a Bachelor's of Professional Studies in fashion merchandising, family consumer science, and marketing management with my minors in marketing. I have a master's from Middle Tennessee State University in curriculum and instruction. And I attended Old Dominion University to receive another master's in career and technical education. And a little unknown fact is that I also come from a CTE family where my mother was a career and technical education teacher, my sister was a CTE teacher, and of course myself. So this micro webinar is a part of a larger series of webinars focused on the high quality CTE program of study framework developed by the Association for Career and Technical Education. The framework is composed of 12 unique elements that characterize a quality CTE program. However, for this webinar specifically, we will focus on element 3, which is student assessment. This element addresses the type and quality of assessments used in the program of study, including the types of knowledge and skills that should be assessed and assessments that lead to recognized post-secondary credentials. There are 8 criteria for student assessments, and we will focus on most of these. However, instead of discussing each criteria individually, we will cluster them in a meaningful way to form a high-quality CTE assessment process utilizing backwards planning or design. The backwards planning process includes standards alignment and goal setting, gathering objective information and data, and lastly, focusing on reliability and validity of assessments along with multiple forms of assessment. Our objectives are the following. Explain how backwards design supports high-quality CTE student assessments. Discuss the importance of objective information or data related to assessment of student attainment of knowledge and skills utilizing backwards design to ensure high-quality CTE student assessments. And then understand how types of assessments support high-quality CTE assessments. So, backwards planning and high-quality CTE assessments. Is anyone ready for a vacation? I know I could use one. Let's think about preparing for a trip. Probably looks a little like this, nice and neat and packed with everything you need based on your destination. However, what if you don't know where you are going? You may look a little like this. Mismatched clothes, not prepared for the trip. Often this is how we approach assessments. We implement assessments without knowing where we want to go. Assessment practices should align with outcomes to ensure our students are as prepared as possible for their futures and that they are aligned to our goals. So let's visit the general concept of backwards planning and design. So when we traditionally think of backwards design or backwards planning, we think about a process where educators design learning experiences and instructional techniques to achieve learning goals. However, let's think about the backwards design process for CTE assessments. Consider a process where CTE educators design assessment practices to reflect student skills attainment and mastery, align with programs of study, and achieve employability skills and credentialing goals. And so we come to this part where we have the three parts of the process. We have identifying desired outcomes, gathering accessible evidence, and identifying and planning assessments. So let's discuss step one, identifying desired outcomes. So what are the assessments and performance goals within your school district, your school, and or your state? When we look at step one, we want to identify desired outcomes. So for example, we could have a desired outcome of we want to increase the number of digital media Adobe Photoshop certifications. We will talk a little bit later about SMART goals. However, this is a great first step because we know that we want to increase the number of certifications and that we need to also include our stakeholders in this process to say, hey, is this a good certification for us to increase? Thinking about maybe with digital media that people are often, a lot of times, self-taught here in 2019. And if the stakeholders, industry professionals say, hey, this is something that we want, all right, let's increase these goals and let's move forward to the next step. So our next step is gathering accessible evidence. During step two, gathering accessible evidence, a person might evaluate your current assessment landscape and gather student evidence or data. Determining your assessment landscape is an important next step in the process. Educators should determine what assessments are being offered, how and what they are measuring regarding student performance, and how do these assessments align with post-secondary education in industry, especially if you are in higher education. I know from previous experience within cosmetology, we have had to collaborate regarding assessments in regards to our post-secondary and secondary schools. We wanted to ensure that when the students came over from the secondary level, that they were prepared to take the exam at the post-secondary level. And that included all the different assessments in between, and or if the students would have had the same prep at both levels. So we need to ensure that whatever's going on within the assessment landscape, that all levels and all stakeholders are a part of that process. So another bigger part of the assessment landscape is gathering objective student data that reflects the student's knowledge and skills attainment. A lot of times this can be historical data. When we talk about objective information, this information is fact-based, measurable, and observable by anyone. Also, is an important part of before and after implementing assessments. You should review historical data 2 years prior. You should also try to obtain data and review this data after you start implementing certain assessments. In regards to historical data, 2 years is typically best practice because you can also, at this point, really review your senior level courses. And you can also look to see what different types of trends in instruction and assessment supported maybe the graduates or senior level students as they matriculated through your programs. So great places to get this type of data from are industry exams that you've already offered. You can do diagnostic assessments, and oftentimes we sometimes do pre and post tests, within the classroom or within the school or department, so you can use that data as well. Core academic data and assessments such as your state math and ELA scores for your students. And then we can look at classroom assessments as well. The academic data can be very important because it can determine what assessments you may or may choose to utilize. As, say, for instance, a math student. Students don't perform well in math, but you have a whole class of construction students that have to take the applied mathematics or a construction exam of some type. And so you'll already know from this data that there may be an area where students won't be as successful, and you can possibly provide some interventions or look at different types of credentialing opportunities as well. You want to compare and contrast multiple types of data and levels of assessments. So look at, again, your secondary and post-secondary assessments. How do they align with each other? How do they complement each other? And most importantly, in this step, how have the students performed? Have the high school students performed better than the post-secondary, or do students perform better at the post-secondary level than the secondary due to maybe more experience and maturity? How does this work together? Think about your industry-aligned tests or assessments versus your school and LEA development. Do you see a difference in the data on those? Do students perform better on one or the other? And then look at the employability skills or technical and academic skills attainment on assessments. What are the students' strengths and what are their weaknesses? All of this data is important to determine what type of assessments that you will need to implement, and then how do you set your goals. And then a great next step is an item analysis. Crosswalk. So you crosswalk your assessment items with your program of study standards, and or you look at your historical assessment performance, and then you crosswalk those with your program of study standards as well to actually understand how the students, the questions or the items on the exam, how do they reflect student performance, and how do they align with your programs of study. So then, after this, you can kind of create your SMART goal. After you've looked at the objective data, after you have looked at your current assessment landscape, and then how did you come to seeing how different levels of industry and education work together, you can possibly perform a SMART goal. So, and SMART goals, as many of us already know, are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. So my SMART goal for here would be, we will increase the number of digital media Adobe Photoshop certifications by 10% for senior level students. And you can take this goal from here and move forward with determining and identifying a plan for your assessments. So choosing assessments and best practices is the third part of our backwards planning. So we determine, when we get to this point, we are determining what assessments are best suited to measure our students' knowledge and skills. We are determining what's the best practices for assessment implementation, and then we are constantly evaluating and the assessment process for effectiveness. So when we look at choosing and planning assessments, a big part of this conversation when it comes to validity and reliability. How well a test measures what is purposed to do in regard to validity, and then to what degree does the assessment tool produce stable and consistent results. So we do not want students failing a test one year and then the next year a whole class passes the test significantly higher than the previous year before. That would be kind of like, oh, what is the reliability of this exam? Did instruction really improve that much, or is it something going on with the actual assessment itself? We want to look at diagnostic assessments. So results provided focus, strengths, and weaknesses for the assessment, and then we want to, again, try to do an item analysis. So when we start looking at validity and reliability, doing an item analysis, a non-mathematical version of one, can easily help us to determine if this is a reliable or valid test or not. And again, we also want to revisit those diagnostic exams so we can look at student strengths and weaknesses as we prepare for moving them forward in the assessment process. When we talk about choosing and planning assessments as well, we have to think about different types. So we have state-developed assessments. So we have traditional and performance-based, depending on your state. Some states do a written project. Some states do some type of written report that students turn in. They do some type of project-based circumstance. And then some states just do a pen and paper test. Some states that have robust systems include like Ohio and Arizona, where they have their own portal for examinations. You have, at any point, you should always, especially at the state level, at all levels, but definitely state, is include the industry stakeholder input and buy-in. We need to really make sure that the program of study and industry align with each other at this point. And then what kind of scoring are we using? What are our performance levels? What are the criteria for mastery? Is the situation a pass or fail opportunity for our students? And then we have the next level where we have teacher and LEA developed assessments. Again, a statistical item analysis would be really great here in regards to validity and reliability. And you can find those on the internet usually, or a YouTube video to figure out how to do one of those, especially if you're not a statistical genius like others. Again, try to get industry stakeholder input and buy-in. If you are going to have LEA or teacher developed assessments, I know here in DC we have a employability skills training course and assessment, and so we had an opportunity to work with different people within industry to validate the curriculum and assessment to ensure our students were prepared for their internships. And again, consider your program of study alignment, your industry alignment, because some things may be more local, especially depending on the size of your state. And so you may want to have an exam where in one part of California, you all focus on this program of study, and it works in San Diego, but then you go to Oakland and there's a different industry there that you all want to cater or provide your students with instruction and assessment in that space. So try to make sure that you have industry involvement when you take those, when you decide to make those choices. And again, what type of scoring rubrics what type of criteria are you going to use? And then again, or if it's pass, fail, or percentage or grade. So when we look at industry assessments, so the one thing about industry assessments as opposed to state and LEA assessments are that they are pretty much already validated and considered reliable. They're easy, therefore that makes them easier to implement. However, I think a lot of people have found that they can also sometimes be harder for our students, but depending on our students' capabilities, reading levels, math levels, different things like that, because these assessments are often geared towards adults who should have learned certain things by a certain point. But the pro is that they're recognized nationally. So if you gain certifications in one state, you can probably take this certification to another state, just depending on what that certification is or through some type of reciprocity agreement. And then we have the industry credential or licensure, which is pretty much kind of on the same, in the same vein as industry assessments. They're easy to implement, but again, can possibly work against our students depending on their reading level and or math levels. And they are often needed to work in industry. So as opposed to maybe offering, you have the, you want to offer a professionalism exam versus offering a student opportunity to gain a license. And so which one will actually take the students further is where that's the conversation that you have to have with yourself when choosing and planning assessments. What do you want the student to be able to do next, and what are you trying to assess in that process? Some people use external and curriculum-based assessments through like WebExam, NAS, NOCTI, Pearson, ACT Work Keys. Again, these are easy to implement, but they can possibly be expensive. They kind of work in collaboration with something else. And some are recognized nationally or within a profession, and some are not. So we have NAF exams, for example, when a student passes a certain amount of NAF exams, they become NAFTRAC certified, and then NAF, the National Academy Foundation, actually has partnered with certain companies to say once these students graduate or complete the NAFTRAC certification process, that they will commit to helping these students get entry-level positions through at least trying to get them an interview or through the application process. However, the student's NAFTRAC certification may or may not be recognized at a company that is not a part of the NAFTRAC consortium, and it may not show that their skills or the skills may not be proven to that particular employer. So there are pros and cons to both types for that type of assessment, but often reflects the work that the students do based on the curriculum that was used. And then we have performance-based assessments, which are great as well, but they have to still be validated and deemed reliable, often through rubrics. And they are so important to performance-based assessments, rubrics. Having a great rubric would make or break a performance-based assessment. And some states consider CTSO participation in projects aligned with assessment practices. So this may be something that you can consider to do within your classroom, your LEA, or even at the state level, counting participation and competition at some point, because they do have rubrics that have been validated already. So it really is just saying, hey, these can count for assessments. So other best practices. When we talk about planning and choosing assessments, best practices are important because we have to get these implemented out into various different audiences. So when we think about planning assessments, let's look at school and LEAs creating a testing window. We often have the state mandated academic testing windows, but we do not have CTE testing windows in all states or LEAs or even within a school. I would petition everyone to consider creating a testing window and putting that on the calendar so students, families, all stakeholders will know this is what's going on during this time. This creates a high quality space where people recognize the work that you do. Here in DC, as we work to implement assessments, we wanted to make sure that our students and our instructors and our LEAs have a great resource where they know about assessments and credentials, but also special education accommodations. Some exams, industry exams, licensure exams, offer special education accommodations. These can be important as you may have a student that needs these, and they could be licensed, or it could literally make or break their them passing or failing. So please look into if the examinations that you offer accommodations for students. Develop a CTE assessment plan and cycle. So going through your assessment process, but also create a cycle of review, a cycle for validating tests along with your standards and programs of study. This could happen every 2 years, 3, 4, 5 years, or align with your purpose plan, but just try to have an opportunity to cycle back through to see if your assessments are meeting the outcomes that you desire. Assessment should be reviewed on a cycle to ensure reliability and validity. And then provide professional development, which I don't think a lot of places do as well, on assessment administration. This includes technology, accommodations, as if you have a lot of our tests are technology driven, and a lot of times the teachers just are getting ready to do the test and it's not ready to roll out. And so this makes a bad space for the student, a bad space for the teacher, and ultimately it could prevent us from meeting our goals at the various different levels for assessment practices. So summary, what was your assessment goal? As we completed this webinar, I hope you all were thinking about different assessment goals. And again, I would like for you to consider a backwards design process, so where you start out looking at your goal, and then you work your way down to considering assessment processes, that you gather objective information and data to support assessment decisions. You always consider historical student data, reliability, and validity when choosing assessments. And then lastly, again, your best practices to support the design process and your goals. The high quality CTE initiative. ACTE has developed evidence-based criteria defining a quality CTE program study and related tools and resources, including a self-evaluation instrument to complete online or to print, high-quality CTE tools that are available online in the online library to support quality implementation, vision sessions and other content to provide professional development on quality elements, and the ACTE awards to recognize quality as well. And all of these can be found online at actonline.org /high-quality CTE. And I would like to personally thank you for attending this webinar. And I hope that you can now implement high-quality CTE assessments at your school, within your school district, LEA, and at the state level. Thank you.